Sejal, once you go live on YouTube, please let me know. Sejal?
Yes, Dimple.
Yeah, you let me know when you go live.
We have gone live. I'll send you the link.
Dimple, you can start now if Faye ma'am is there and everybody's ready.
Okay. Live on YouTube, please let me know.
We are live on
We are
YouTube.
live on YouTube. You can start.
Sejal?
Hello.
Yeah, you let me know when you go live.
I have gone live, Dimple. You can start.
I can hear too.
Sejal, just text her. Maybe she's not able to hear. Just text her one.
Now am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Shivam, we'll start.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Greetings to one and all. I am Dimple Jangid, Campus Ambassador for VG Vaze College of Arts, Science and Commerce Autonomous. I will be the host for the evening, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome here our speaker for today, Faye D Souza ma'am. I also welcome Dr. Manali Londhe ma'am, Principal of SK Somaya Degree College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Dr. BB Sharma sir, Principal of VG Vaze College, Dr. Preeta Nilesh ma'am, Vice Principal of VG Vaze College, and Mr. Julio Ribeiro sir, Trustee of Public Concern for Governance Trust, and all the dignitaries and attendees present here today. I, on behalf of Public Concern for Governance Trust in association with Vaze Model United Nations and Celestial the Fest, hosted by SK Somaya Degree College, would like to welcome you all to this webinar on the topic Freedom of Press in India. Now, I would like to introduce the institutions organizing this webinar. Public Concern for Governance Trust is a registered trust founded by Mr. Julio Ribeiro sir, Dr. R.K. Anand sir, and late Mr. B.G. Deshmukh sir to increase public participation and activism towards creating a more transparent and efficient governance system. In order to sensitize and mentor the youth in ethical values with an emphasis on good governance, PCGT started the Youth for Governance program in the year 2012. Previously, PCGT has organized dialogues, workshops, and webinars as requested by the campus ambassadors on issues that are related to good governance and involving eminent speakers and role models in different fields to guide and inspire the youth. Our college, VG Vaze College of Arts, Science and Commerce Autonomous, is a multi-faculty institution established in 1984. Vaze College is the first NAC accredited college in the state of Maharashtra with top 5-star ranking and was re-accredited in 2005 as well as 12 with A grade. Vazi Model United Nations was established in the year 2017 by the then 12th grade students who wished to bring about change in our college. They wanted to give something back to the college that was shaping them to become the leaders of tomorrow, hence developing a cycle which accelerated their curiosity to learn and explore more about politics and international relations. Waziban has expanded tremendously ever since, and now they are back with their 4th edition. Celestial is a BBR department fest held by SK Somaya Degree College of Arts, Science and Commerce. Celestial was founded in 2012 by then coordinator Professor Arun Kumar Dubey sir with other professors of the BBR department and continued to 2016 every year. Celestial 2020 is a revival of the fest after a hiatus of 4 years. Their objective is to give every student of the BBR department a chance to bloom under a small committee and to enhance their skills, to unleash the goals and dreams of students by giving them a platform at the right time and age, to be a part of other BPI colleges and increase their knowledge and understanding of the sector, to give a message to other students that banking and insurance does not only mean textbooks. Now, I would like to call upon Julio Ribeiro sir to speak a few words. Sir, you have the floor.
Simple. I think we have about 300 participants today, and you all are very lucky. This particular batch, we have it every week. Some college or other, we have campus ambassadors in so many colleges now, even in Pune. And this batch has Faye D Souza, who is one of the most prominent journalists today in India. and she always speaks the truth. So that is what you are very lucky to hear, going to hear. And I was very touched that she should have accepted our invitation, because if we can expose students to minds like Faye's, I think that, and her experience, I think that we have succeeded, at least PCGT has succeeded in doing yeoman service to the community, because these young students are going to be the future. And we want to mold them into good citizens more than anything, good people, good human beings, and they should know what is happening in the country, what is happening in different enterprises, in different fields of endeavor, and they should make up their minds about what they think should be done, what should happen, and when they have a chance to influence events, they should be able to do that. I think if we can manage to make these students more knowledgeable, better human beings, PCGT has served its purpose. I thank Faye for having accepted our invitation, and I ask you to continue, because I don't want to waste too much of time when we would like to hear her. Thank you.
Thank you, Ribeiro, sir. Now I would like to formally introduce our speaker. So, Faye De Souza ma'am is an award-winning journalist who has changed the way news is covered on Indian television by focusing the audience's attention on the issues that matter to the citizens rather than those who fuel the emotions of partisan debates. Faye ma'am's calm research style and hosting shows prioritizes information over opinion. Her focus on accountability of the government, responsible taxation, safety of the women and children, education, health, and urban development has also resulted in several policy changes that have proven to urban development and has proven that a journalist can still bring about improvements in the status quo. Faye Mam is a journalist of the millennials, young, fresh, and brutally honest. Faye Mam was the youngest woman journalist in India to have led a national news channel as its executive editor. Post her exit from television, Faye Mam has begun her entrepreneurial journey and will soon launch her own digital news platform targeted at the youth, urban Indian audience. Now, I would like to request all the attendees to kindly type your questions in the chat box directed towards the accounts name as questions, and we shall accommodate these questions towards the end of the session. And it is recommended that all the attendees keep their videos on and microphones off during all the times. Now, I would like to welcome our speaker, Faye De Souza, ma'am. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me now? Just checking.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Good evening to everyone. I was, I just heard Mr. Ribeiro speak, and I'm extremely humbled by the very kind introduction he gave me. It's an honor to be invited to speak at an event like this. I want to thank the Public Concern for Governance Trust for the amazing work that they're doing, specifically with Young India, because I think that this is where the work really needs to be done. And of course, headed by Mr. Tulio Ribeiro, that work that is being done right now is making a massive difference. So it is an honor, and I'm deeply humbled to be invited to speak at this event. I also thank the Vaze College and the SK Somaya Degree College of Mumbai for organizing this webinar as well, and for picking the topic of freedom of press in India. I don't think there has been, a more opportune time or a more important time for us to have this conversation that we're having right now, because almost every conversation that happens over tea or coffee in this country invariably centers around the media or what's happening with the media. And I would like to use my experience of nearly 16 years within television media to sort of give you an understanding from my point of view of what's going on right now as far as media is concerned. So getting straight to it, you know, there is a Parisian organization called Reporters Without Borders, and every year this organization puts out an index of freedom of press. It's called Freedom of Press Index, and the index that came out this year actually had India drop down a few places to be 142 out of 180 countries. That is not a good place to be. In fact, our neighbors Bhutan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka score above us as far as freedom of press is concerned. And there were some interesting notes in that index report that came out of Reporters Sans Borders. And some of the stuff in that report was actually quite disheartening. Some things we already know, some things we don't know. In 2018, there were 6 murders of journalists in our country. In 2019, there were no murders of journalists in our country, but there was murder of journalism instead. So the index had actually pointed out that even though there were no murders of journalists in the year of 2019, that there was, and I quote, constant press freedom violations, including police violence against journalists, ambushes by political activists, and reprisal instigated by criminal groups or corrupt local officials. And I want to give you some examples of what we're talking about, recent examples that you will actually remember. The report also said that there were coordinated hate campaigns, and we know this more commonly and colloquially as trolling. Coordinated hate campaigns waged on social media against journalists who dared to speak up or write about subjects that basically stand against what the majority believes. And these campaigns, the report says, are alarming and calls for the concerned journalists to be murdered. And the report added that the campaigns are particularly virulent when the targets are women. So women journalists are actually subject to a distressing amount of trolling on social media. In fact, one of the things I found interesting was just yesterday when, or the last 2 days, when everyone was talking about the ad of Tanishq that was taken off because Tanishq faced a lot of trolling. Most of the women journalists on Twitter actually turned around and said, what is this? This is the amount you can take, because we take far worse on a regular basis. Women journalists are threatened with rape, their family members are threatened, they're threatened with murder, and the most despicable things are said to women journalists in this country. And I think that the important part to pick out of the RSF report is that these are coordinated hate campaigns. So this is not generally a general public that is upset and decided to come onto social media and abuse. I don't believe that ordinary citizens resort to abuse of that fashion, because quite honestly, while I have received a lot of abuse on social media, never ever in public, when I've been out at an airport or anywhere else, as someone walked up to me and said this to me to my face. I believe, therefore, that a lot of this is in fact coordinated campaigns where people are part of a campaign to vilify or to discredit a particular journalist. And journalists often talk about how, and I get asked about it a lot, about how do you develop a thick skin to this? Are you able to take it in your stride? The truth is that a lot of journalists learn to take it in their stride because they have very little other choice. But should they have to? And should we look at this as part of a larger sort of tapestry of press freedom in India? We saw this sort of trolling that journalists come under, the kind of abuse that journalists come under. That's one pocket, the trolling and the abuse. The more serious pocket is the use of the sedition law. Now, there has been a liberal application of the sedition law against journalists. Now, sedition, if you read your history, is a law that was written by the British specifically to crush dissent among Indian, not citizens back then, but subjects. One of the most prominent people in the history of India who faced the sedition law and who went to jail for it was Mahatma Gandhi. That sedition law has interestingly been preserved by successive governments of our country because it's a very useful law. It's a law in which governments can treat citizens like subjects instead of treating them like citizens, can take away their rights and accuse them of working against the country in the most opaque fashion. That law has been used recently very heavily against journalists. Now, I want to give you some examples. In fact, a very recent example that will be fresh in your minds that you will actually remember is the Hathras case that took place in Uttar Pradesh, where that young woman was allegedly gang raped, and post that the police came out and said that she was not gang raped according to them. I want to remind you that it's not the police's place to make that decision. But they also said that there is a larger international conspiracy to spread fake news and to destabilize the state with caste-based riots. They have arrested a journalist and charged more than one person with sedition in that particular case. And sedition is a very strict law which which is extremely unfair when used against journalists. So that's the second pocket of weapons being used against journalists right now. In Jammu and Kashmir, and it has been over a year since the status of Jammu and Kashmir as a state was changed, the abrogation of 370, many journalists have been put in jail. I'll give you one example. There was a woman journalist, a freelance photographer, 26 years old, Masrat Zahra, who was accused of by the J&K police of UAPA. Now, this is the anti-terror law. And they basically alleged that she was uploading anti-national posts on her social media account. And according to a statement put out by the Jammu and Kashmir police, they registered a case against her and they arrested her. Again, using the law against journalists. Freelance journalist Prashant Kanodia, who lives in Noida, was arrested by the Uttar Pradesh police on the 18th of August. And Prashant Kanodia remains in jail till today. He's been in custody mainly over a tweet that the police argued created enmity between groups. He was denied bail by the court, and then after that, when the Allahabad High Court, asked the Uttar Pradesh government to respond to while he was in jail, they asked for 4 weeks, and those 4 weeks were granted by the court. And so Prashant Kanodia is going to spend another full month in jail while his wife campaigns for his release. Prashant Kanodia is still in jail. This is how the law is being used against journalists right now. Not to mention the fact that many organizations, especially the ones that function online, will tell you stories about how they get raided on a regular basis by the income tax department or by the GST department, or how they're constantly in some way or the other put through the punishment of process that is part of running a business in this country. Pressure is put on journalists on a regular basis. That's the second pocket that I want to bring to your notice. The third pocket is the fingerprints of influence of the government all over the media. And if we look at what people are talking about in the media right now, we're talking about the extremely aggressive journalism that we see on television, thumping of chests and tables, pointing of fingers, accusations that are completely baseless, people's reputations and lives and careers being snatched out of the ground and thrown in the air because journalists just feel that they're entitled to do so. I mean, we've all seen how television media played out the investigation into the Sushant Singh Rajput case. Subsequently, how they went after Rhea Chakraborty and insisted on her arrest with little to no evidence. Post that, during the NCB questioning of various Bollywood celebrities, how those Bollywood celebrities were chased down and treated in the most, uncool fashion, to put it in the very least. And of course, the final nail in the coffin is the TRP scam that has now come out, where the Mumbai police has alleged that certain channels were rigging their ratings. And as of today, the organization that actually collates those TRPs has decided not to put out or not to collate the TRPs of news media for the next 3 months. You'd be interested to know that in the conversations I've had with representatives of BARC and people who advise BARC, they all say very clearly that while TRPs are collated and calculated for everyone in television, so people who do movies channels, entertainment channels, the Hindi entertainment channels, which are the biggest in the country, things like Big Boss, and these are the biggest shows in the country. It's only news channels that bandy about who is number one, that actually get into like a mudslinging match about I'm number one, you're behind me, I'm ahead. Nobody else does it. And also misrepresents the TRPs. It incidentally most only happens in news and mostly happens with English news, which is disappointing, because that is why BARC has decided not to put out numbers of news channels. And I'll tell you why this is disappointing. Because among all of the various kinds of content you see on television, which is movies, sports, entertainment, and news, news is meant to be a sector that particularly runs on ethics. And according to what we have heard, it is the one sector that is not running on ethics right now, one part of television that's not running on ethics right now. And that's something to really worry about. But we have to ask ourselves why this is happening. We sit around and talk about how bad things have gotten without fully understanding why they have gotten so bad. And there have been several theories about the fact that the entire pulling through of the Sushant Singh Rajput case for so many months was happening for two reasons. One, because there was a Bihar election coming up, and this was easy to monopolize and to manipulate the Bihar people. And we saw the evidence of that in a poster put out by the BJP for the Bihar elections. The second argument was that it was a distraction to everything else that was happening in the country, including China sort of breathing down our borders, the fact that our COVID numbers were shooting through the roof, and finally that our economy and our jobs were tanking. And everyone was distracted by this one case, which we understand the CBI is fairly close to finishing their investigation as well today. Why does this happen? At whose behest does this happen? In order to be responsible citizens and in order to be responsible consumers of news, we have to understand how this is working. And I want to put before you some evidence of what I see. If we look at television right now, and the large number of young people who are watching this will know that most people have now switched to the internet. Of the four things I said you used to watch on television about 5 years ago, which is news, live sports, entertainment and movies, live sports, entertainment and movies have already moved to the OTT platforms or various forms of the internet. News, young people at least are no longer switching on their televisions for. They've cut that cord and moved away from it. There is a very small group of people in a certain age group of 40 plus who are still watching news on television every night. Yes, and young people should advise them against it. But what this has led to is a sharp loss of eyeballs of business for news channels, specifically English news channels. The second thing we must realize is that running a news channel is a very expensive business. So when Mirror Now was launched, which I was the editor of, I staffed it, I planned the P&L, I was in charge of how much money we were making and spending. And I can tell you firsthand that it is an expensive prospect to run a television channel in India. The costs of satellite are very expensive. Distribution is very expensive. You need a large team. You need a lot of equipment. You need office space. You need people across the country. And this becomes expensive in a market that is weak and in a market where people are turning to the internet more and to television less. Also, remember that we were in a weak economy even before COVID hit us, and now things are very, very bad, particularly bad. So what happens then? We have television channels that will fight tooth and nail for TRPs because the competition is that tight, because they're entirely dependent on advertising to make any money at all. And advertisers, up until now, only cared about the ratings. They didn't care about the kind of content that was being uploaded and was being put out by these channels, whether it was divisive, whether it was fake news, whether it was misogynistic, whether it was Islamophobic. They didn't pay any attention. They only cared for the top 3 TRPs, and those were the guys who would get the advertising allocations. We've only seen now in the last couple of weeks that a few brands have stepped out and said that we will no longer put our money in these channels, because you must understand that brands actually book advertising months in advance. And so they don't know what content is going to come up on these television channels, but now they've decided to blacklist a few. So Bajaj and Parle are 2 brands that have made this announcement, and we expect others to follow as well. This is what you have now. You have an industry that is struggling to hold on to its viewers. You have advertisers, which is the only kind of revenue that this industry gets, only choosing the highest TRPs. So you will now, as a result, have an industry that will do anything for eyeballs, anything at all. And I don't have to tell you what anything looks like, because you've seen it play out over the last 6 months. Everything from how the Tablighi Jamaat conference was completely vilified, and there were all of these, completely false. Now courts are dismissing these cases one by one, completely false ideas that the members of the Tablighi Jamaat were willfully trying to spread coronavirus in India, and that took up a fair amount of time. Post that, we saw Sushant Singh Rajput, Riya Chakrabarti, all of these things. And the manner in which these were treated, I think, disgusted even those people who didn't really know what the rules of journalism were. You just knew that there was something wrong going on. The last piece of information I want to share with you is the fact that one of the biggest advertisers in news media, both print and on television, happens to be the governments. Governments, both center and state, because governments have a large allocation of money within each of their projects that's dedicated to public service advertising, Jalhit Mein Jari as they call it, telling you, for example, to get your child vaccinated, telling you, for example, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, not to leave garbage on the floor, putting out, massive videos with the likes of big movie stars, educating citizens, which has always been a part of the government's job. But what governments can do in a market like this is use that allocation and that money to only give it to those channels who toe their line, and to pull it away or to deny to those channels who don't toe their line. So what you have then is a very starved industry with one massive, gravy train passing through it, and everybody wants to be at that gravy train. I'll give you an example. According to an RTI, between the years 2014 and 2019, the government of India spent upwards of 5,000 crore rupees on advertisements. 5,000 crore rupees is a lot of money for a starving industry. They will do anything because that is the hand that feeds it. The other thing you would have noticed are these conclaves that get put up, right? Every big news media house puts up these conclaves talking about how India is going to be amazing. These conclaves are effectively designed in order to make money, because you get sponsors and you are able to cover the costs or to raise the money that you need to raise for one quarter in just one conclave. But what you must remember about these conclaves is that they only happen and sponsors only come on board if you get a cabinet minister or upwards to inaugurate your conclave or speak at it. And if you happen to be a channel or a network that criticizes the government, very few cabinet ministers will come to your conclaves, and as a result, you will not make any money. So let's step back now and take a look at what we have. We have an industry that's not making any money. We have an industry that's very expensive to run. We have an industry where audiences are leaving. So all you have to do now is to do whatever monkey dance needs to be done in order to bring the TRPs back or to bring the eyeballs back. And you also need to toe the line of the political masters who will make sure you get extra money or you get the kind of money you need in order to survive. And that is why fundamentally we have a media that is not designed to tell you the truth. And I'll tell you, if we want to examine this, and I'll put this basically in the first day of journalism school, right? So if you were to go to journalism, study journalism in college, they would teach you on the first day that there are 5 rules to journalism. And I'll take you through these rules. Rule number 1 is truth and accuracy. Journalism, by definition, is non-fiction. You cannot make up the story. It has to be facts, and it has to be all the facts. This is the first thing they teach you. You have to check, you have to double check, you have to triple check, because you cannot put out information that is not fact. Now, by this, I'm not saying the journalists will not make mistakes. Of course, they'll make mistakes. Newsrooms are all run by human beings, and human beings make mistakes. And you will have once in a while a slip up, an error that will run, but there is a system in place of an apology that has to run after that. An apology that says that, listen, we got this wrong. This is what we had said. That's not what it is. This is the truth instead. Truth and accuracy is the foundation stone of journalism. Independence is the second one. Independence basically means that you cover your story without fear or favor, which means you're not favoring anybody in your story and you're not afraid of anybody in the story. And I've just listed out to you what happens to journalists who tell the truth. So that fear angle, I can tell you honestly, is already there. Favor, as we have also listed out, has already come out. Fairness and impartiality. And we've seen various organizations sort of lean one way or the other, and the question of fairness then becomes a problem. And finally, humanity and accountability. So number 4 is humanity. And why is humanity important? Journalism is not about just telling you what you find interesting. So if you find, for example, Sushant Singh Rajput interesting, that's one story. Where does the humanity part of that story come in? The humanity part of that story talks about the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of migrant laborers who were walking back to their villages to whom nobody paid any attention. There were hundreds of thousands of people losing their jobs to whom nobody paid any attention. There were farmers in deep crisis to whom nobody paid any attention. There were people dying of COVID, unable to access beds, unable to access ambulances, unable to pay their hospital bills, to whom nobody paid any attention. So humanity is also important because of the empathy with which one has to approach the story, the subject and the audience, and the fact that you have to, the job of a journalist is to tell stories and give voice to those who don't have voice. Not to just spend 70 to 80% of your time on one story because you think it will bring you adequate TRPs. And finally, the rule of accountability, which I touched upon a little earlier, that when a journalist makes mistakes, it's important as an organization next day to print an apology or to put out an apology. And this is the reason why. Because people should or ought to believe in an ideal world what they read in their newspapers or what they see on the news. But if you've put out something that is wrong, you need to correct it so that your audience, A, continues to maintain that credibility with you, that relationship of credibility, and 2, they realize that, okay, what you told me yesterday was wrong, and so I no longer believe it, and so they are no longer falsely informed. What happens when journalists no longer apologize? And there's no accountability. And I want to give you an example here of a particular case that happened a couple of years ago. And I use this example because it's not a political story, so nobody can accuse me of being on one side or the other side. A few years ago, and I remember the day when we heard that Sridevi had passed away, the actress. She was in Dubai at the time, and within a few hours, several news channels had started putting out conspiracy theories of how she had died. That she had been murdered. Some even suggested that some family members of her husband may have murdered her. And there were all these conspiracy theories sort of being discussed on television about the size of the bathtub and how this would have happened. And I remember asking many of the local reporters, and we had actually gotten local journalists in Dubai to go to the hospital, to go to the embassy and check for information. But we weren't able to get any sort of confirmation of any foul play. And so we decided not to do that story that night. And I know nobody watched the channel that night because we were not doing the exciting story. But 2 years since then, we've realized that there was no truth in that at all. There has been zero evidence confirming any of the conspiracy theories that were bandied about that night. Zero evidence. Nothing has emerged. But has there been any apology from the news channels who put out that story that night? Did anybody turn around and apologize to her family, apologize to her fans for ruining her legacy, for someone who had worked her entire life? When I say Sridevi, you should be thinking Chalbaz or Hawaii. Instead, you're thinking bathtub, because there were news channels that night who tarnished her legacy, all for one night's TRPs. They actually broke many rules that night. They broke the rule of truth and accuracy. They broke the rule of fairness and impartiality. They broke the rule of accountability after that. And all of this is being done for TRPs. All of this is being done in order to follow the line of whatever instructions are being given to them. What we have then, if we step back and look at all of the stories that I've put before you, we have a media that is being crushed right now, that is in desperate crisis. And it's in desperate crisis on different fronts. It's in crisis because its individual journalists are working under a cloud of fear. It's in crisis because brands will not advertise on newspapers or on television channels that question the government. It's in crisis because financially it's not making enough money. And as a result, what you'll see is that most of these now news groups, even post-COVID, have cut a lot of jobs. And when they cut jobs, you have good journalists who are now out of work. They cut jobs of journalists who are on the ground, who are doing the real investigations and the real reporting, who are bringing you the real stories. They cut the real work of fact-checking. And they bring younger and younger people into the newsroom and give them more and more responsibility, which is great for young people, but it also results in a lot of errors, and it also results in a lot of bad journalism, which is why you see what I call point and shoot journalism, where journalists are just standing in front of something with a mic and pointing and yelling instead of actually going and doing the investigation and learning the truth on the ground. It's a very bleak picture that I have painted of freedom of press in India right now. And the question a lot of people ask me after I finish telling these stories is, what can we do? It's more than what can you do. You must realize that this is something you have to do, because this is the future of the country. Journalism is completely necessary for a democracy to function. The democracy cannot function unless you have a robust media that's telling you the truth without fear or favor. Because if you don't know the truth, you won't be voting adequately. If you don't vote adequately, this is not a democracy that can function in a healthy fashion. What you need to do is two things. One, support strong independent journalism and support strong independent journalistic outfits with your attention span, and of course, financially, if you can. Support those journalists who are working on the ground, who are doing ground reporting, who are doing ground investigations. And raise your voice every time you see or hear about the abuse of journalists. Because fundamentally what we must realize is the way the media is designed at this point, you are not the customer. You are the commodity. And I use this analogy quite often to just drive home this point, which is that you are to television channels what chicken is to real good chicken. You are the commodity. Your attention span is being packaged and sold to the advertiser. And in many cases, that advertiser is the government, state or center. And this is happening because of the way the revenue is designed. The revenue is designed to come in from advertisers and not from customers. So they want to get you to watch so they can get somebody else to place an ad. They want to get you to watch so they can get government to say that, okay, you've convinced so many people of what we want. Here is an ad for you. The only way to break this is to no longer be a commodity and to actually be the customer. This is why we're having TRP scams. This is why you have the Sushant Singh Rajput case pulled and dragged in the fashion that we have seen. This is why the real stories get ignored. This is why real journalists are losing their jobs. This is why you don't know the truth. And this is why we're rated 142 out of 180 in the Freedom of Press Index of the world. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I would like to thank ma'am now, and I would like to call upon. I'm sorry. I would like to take some questions now. So, Dimple, if you have the questions, you may begin.
We have a question from Disha. Is there a need of universal code of journalism of conduct? Keeping in mind the individuals aren't legally binded to follow the set of rules, will strengthening the laws be beneficial or will it harm the freedom of journalism?
See, that's a really excellent question, because we even saw the Supreme Court recently in the Sudarshan TV case sort of figure out where that very fine line is. It is an extremely delicate matter, and it's an extremely fine line for one reason. Journalism, like I said, has to be self-regulated, which is why we have we have self-regulation organizations. So News Broadcasters Standards Authority, we have the NBA, we have organizations that put out rules and then send out notices to those who break those rules. Unfortunately, we've also seen several television channels decide not to follow those rules and not to be part of that association at all. We also have rules of defamation, criminal and civil defamation, laws that can be brought into court. But these are long drawn out cases that take forever, and every good journalist in India has a few of these cases against them in any case. The fine line that happens, like you pointed out in your question, Disha, is the fact that if the laws are made very stringent and if the power is handed to government, any government will use that power to crush dissent within journalists, because that will be the natural tendency, because the job of a journalist is to question government, right? So it actually has to come from within. It actually has to come from within the industry to be better regulated, and it has to come from within consumers of the product to actually shun those who don't give them the product that they deserve. So there's no easy answer, there's no clear answer to this. It has to be a fine line between journalists doing ethical work and the laws and the courts in our country. That's a great question.
Ma'am, we have another question. Yeah. And the question is that, are there any provisions that guarantee confidentiality of sources of information gathered by news channels? And why are certain journalists being compelled to reveal their sources regarding this research in the SSR case, to be precise?
Okay, so it is again an ethical stand that journalists don't reveal their sources. The reason for this is obviously because sources are built on relationships that take a very long time. Sources give information to journalists very often on the explicit understanding that their identity will not be revealed and they won't face the repercussions wherever it is they're working or living. I believe under the Indian laws, if the matter is under investigation, then the investigating authority can demand details of sources, and in which case the journalist might be compelled to reveal those sources. But journalists are not compelled to reveal sources to public. And I think Mr. Rivero would also be in a good place to answer this question for us. But my understanding is that if the matter is under investigation, so if for example, there has been a murder and the police is investigating who's committed that murder, and there is a journalist who's put out information saying so-and-so has committed the murder, it is within the police's rights to ask that journalist, how did you find out? Can you tell us? That information can be summoned, in my understanding.
Next question we have is from Siddharth Sridhar. Does the world of journalism outside of mainstream media look promising or unstable in the current political climate? What are the difficulties faced by an independent media house or freelance journalist?
A great question again. There are pros and cons to everything. The pros of being an independent journalist at this point is that you don't have to take orders from a large media house, because they set the rules of what they're constantly changing the rules, as you can see. Even recently, just 2 days ago, we saw a very large media house put out rules to all their employees saying you cannot post anything on social media other than our content. This, I believe, is an infringement on freedom of expression. But this is what happens when you're part of a large media house. They can use their contracts to sort of send out instructions that you don't have to follow if you are an independent journalist. The threats to an independent journalist are obviously, like I pointed out, punishment of process of investigation, raids by the tax departments, sort of nuisance suits that come out where you're constantly summoned, you're constantly questioned, the long legal battles that independent journalists do not have the finances to be able to fight. That's a big difference between being part of an organization and being independent, is the amount of money it costs to actually fight a legal battle if one such legal battle does come up. Other than that, of course, there are the finances, how to monetize, the news. A lot of independent journalists are asking their customers to support them, or asking their readers and viewers to support them financially. But it's still not a very reliant, or it's not, it's very difficult to build a financial model for the next 2 or 3 years and give visibility of salaries to the people who work with you, because it is a tough market, and because a lot of times people want news for free and they don't really want to pay for it. So I see these as the two major challenges, or three major challenges. One is finances needed for legal work. Secondly is to be able to pay salaries at all, and finally is pressure from government.
Ma'am, we have one more question. The recent Hathras case, where journalists were cordoned off from the victim's village for a few days, was very disturbing and a clear violation of all the rules that you mentioned right now. Do you think that this is a dangerous precedent and poses another fight for the press? How can we combat this?
It's a very dangerous precedent, because what the government used is, what the police used is law and order as an excuse to bar journalists from going in and meeting the family. They locked the family into their homes, they took away their phones, they took away the personal rights of the family of the victim, which is unheard of. And even though it has been pointed out by the courts that what was done, including the cremation, or what I call the disposal of the body in the middle of the night by the police, the fact is that it did get done, and it did set a precedent of some sort. And the state government has actually just blamed local authorities for making those decisions. Now, it is a violation not just of the tenets of journalism, but it is a violation of the personal fundamental rights of the family members, on many counts, on several counts. And we do hope that while the courts continue to hear this case, that the courts will also set a precedent to the fact that this sort of thing is not okay, and that should correct some of the precedent that's been set by the state government.
Next question we have is from Shubham. While covering stories on ground, how difficult it is for a journalist to keep aside her personal ideologies in order to maintain objectivity?
See, actually, when covering stories on the ground, and I've been on the ground as recently as during our lockdown, when we went into hospitals, we went into slums, we went out and talked to people. The job when you're on the ground is to just relay the information to your audience, to carry all the information that you receive and to do justice to the story. In very few cases, your personal ideology does come into play. And this is something that the audiences must understand. And a great way to understand this is to use your traditional newspaper, right? So your traditional newspaper, you have your city page, your state page, your front page, you have science and technology, you have business, you have entertainment, you have sports. And there's a page in the middle, which is your editorial page. It's on your editorial page that your editor is allowed an opinion. The rest of the newspaper has no opinion. The rest of the newspaper necessarily needs to only put out the information. So reporting from the ground is that. You're supposed to only put out the information and not have any of your personal beliefs or your personal ideology, as you call it, come in the way. I do believe that a lot of journalists in the country are still doing very, very honest work and are still putting out very strong ground reports without letting their personal feelings get in the way. In fact, I believe that the only feeling that has to come into play when you're reporting from the ground is the feeling of empathy. When you empathize with the subject and you empathize, with what you're covering, and the principle of dignity, where everybody you are covering, the story, the viewer, the journalist, everybody has a certain degree of dignity as human beings. And we saw that sort of be ripped out very recently by television media. But and this is really training on the ground. Journalists receive this training from their editors to not let their personal emotions sort of get in the way when they're filing a story, and to tell all of the details without leaving any of the details out.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Also, due to time constants, we could accommodate only these many questions. So now I would like to call upon Dr. Nilakshi Roy, ma'am, to speak a few words.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Hello, Faye. and respects to Dr. Ribeiro and others who are there present as today's guests. It was indeed a very heartening experience to listen to you, Faye, when you reiterated all these concepts we teach in the classroom, because we do offer a very small, very short course on journalism in the second year. And these are exactly the ways that we begin every lecture. And then, we keep on having to eat our words very often when we give real life examples. Okay. But, coming from you to listen to these words, students have, I'm sure, taken heart. They must have realized that there are still practitioners like you in the field out there who believe in what everyone believes is enshrined in our constitution, that we need to be this way in case we are the fourth estate, and in case we are, wanting to take the nation ahead to some kind of a track of prosperity. The things that you have said to clarify the kind of cloud that is there in today's very miasmatic space of journalism would definitely be shared and understood by our students. But I hope that they do take heart from your voice of hope, that there are people like you who are trying to work, that there is a way out, that the citizen himself or herself is as much involved in the mongering of news because he himself or herself is also the producer and the consumer. So the way that you have reiterated the independence of the presence and the importance of independent media is also probably heartening to the Gen X who are largely millennials, who are definitely into non-traditional media, who probably get to the truth of it. Many times I find my children telling me, "Mommy, it's not like that. Will you please read this?" And they share articles with us from very strong independent bodies. So yes, indeed, there is a way forward. There is things to take heart from your talk. I had a very small question which could not get addressed, but I don't know how you would, whether you would have time to respond to it. But
it would be my pleasure. I think we have 10 minutes.
Yeah,
so
yeah. It's just that I wanted to know how your peers react to your fearlessness and outspokenness, because just now you were talking about, the unethical practices that many of them, or the poor standards of journalism they associate with even big names, and how we keep flouting it. So probably our students would benefit if you just added that line, that what is the response to the movement within to bring back journalism to its,
Ma'am, that's an excellent question. There are many journalists right now who are independent all across the country. In fact, my dream is to someday manage to stitch together all these people and create a platform where everybody can monetize their content and put it out, and people can access. So you can access information from Coimbatore and from Trichy and from Chandigarh, because there are local independent journalists that are doing good work. There is journalists support each other as well, talk to each other on a regular basis, try and help each other out. There is a good camaraderie between many journalists and who are supportive of each other. Yes, there is, of course, the mainstream media, what is giving us a bad name at this point, which is a handful of channels who, quite honestly, I haven't really spoken to, in the last 1 year since I have exited television. But I do vouch for the fact that there are many journalists who call on a regular basis. We talk to each other. We try and find ways to support each other. We try and find ways to help each other out, with information, with contacts, with just, bucking up sometimes if necessary. And I do hope that someday we can create a federation of independent journalists who can pool their resources in some way and give citizens the kind of work that is really required. That's a dream of mine, and hopefully someday it will come true.
Yeah, this coming from you is definitely heartening for students who might be entering the profession, or are deciding to enter the profession, but many times they're advised against it. Their parents are not supportive.
One piece of advice I would like to give young people who are entering the profession. when you have to get a job, you cannot be a journalist straight out of college, because there is a certain amount of diamond polishing that your editor does for you, which can happen only after you worked with an editor for a certain number of years. You learn the sort of soft skills or the unsaid rules of journalism and how to navigate, the world around you. Pick your first job based on the editor you will work with. Do not pick your first job based on the organization or the name that you're going to work with. Because a lot of times, far too often, I have seen young people who join big organizations. They work with terrible people. They get disillusioned very quickly, and then they leave the profession. And as a profession, then we lose that talent, which is really disappointing. So do not join an organization for the name. Join a job based on who your first editor is going to be, because your editor will set the tone of the kind of the kind of journalist you will become in your career. And that's really important. And I keep telling people in college, pay very close attention to your teachers of economics, political science, journalism, and pay very close attention to your first editor, because decades later, while you're working, those voices will still be in your head. And that is the foundation on which you build your career. And you form the person you are as a journalist. So you have to pay really close attention to it, and to your teachers and to your editor, who will be your first professional teacher. So choose wisely, not for the money and not for the big fancy name, but choose a good editor.
Thank you so much, Faye. I think that would be really, really very meaningful for our students. Thank you so much. Lovely meeting you after 6th of September 2018, when I was interviewed with you, by you, on the striking down of 377. So very pleasant memories of that. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Dimple. Thanks for having me here and sharing my words. Over to you, Dimple.
Now, I would like to call upon the President of Celestial, Anupriya Rakshit, to give the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose a vote of thanks in Faye Ma'am's presence. Ma'am, your presence alone is captivating to get us through this webinar. Your eloquent and apt views has given us students a new perspective. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to everyone who took the time and effort to be with us today. Mr. Julia Ribeiro, sir, Mr. BP Rajan, sir, and other trustees. Thank you for such a progressive and constant effort. Further, I would also like to thank Dr. Manali Londhe ma'am, Principal, SK Somaya, Dr. BB Sharma sir, Principal, Dr. Preeta Nilesh man, Vice Principal of VG Vaze College. I would also take a moment to thank our mentors, Professor Arun Kumar Dubey sir, PBI Coordinator SK Somaya, Dr. Nilakshi Roy ma'am, our Head of Department English, Ms. Sangeeta Ahir ma'am, Head of Department Political Science of VG Vaze College Junior Section. Last but not the least, Mr. Shivam Jain Kakadia sir, who has been constantly there for us throughout the event and contributed generously in every step of the way. We thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed. See you in the next webinar.
Can we have everybody switching on the cameras for some time so that we can click a picture? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.